and we can go to whatever church that we want. But when it comes to our family, we're stuck. I mean, no, when it comes to our family, we're blessed with the fact that we have this one family, and pretty much we're going to do life with them. You don't get to change them. Your siblings are your siblings, your parents are your parents, your spouse is your spouse, your kids are your kids. So that being said, we have a responsibility. And our responsibility is to manage those relationships carefully. Because the way that we manage those relationships will play a huge factor of what we ourselves are going to look like long term, what our family is going to look like long term, even what our family's family is going to look like long term. So we want to manage these things in a way where they're going to go the distance. So we're taking a look at a couple of these different types of relationships so we can decide how can we manage these things in a way for our highest probability of success. You know, Abuna talked the first week about the role of a mother and the importance and the blessings that the mothers bring to the family. Last week, I talked a little bit about the role from the parent to the child and how if we are parenting effectively and we are living our lives effectively, we can actually pass on blessings to our kids. Now, today, what I want to talk about is something that I believe is probably really, really, really important to family. If you're looking at your family in general, this is what I would call like the cornerstone relationship in the family. And it's something that if you were married, we had no idea we were getting ourselves into, right? So I looked at this. This was me and Christina on our honeymoon. I'm guessing probably about at this time, we probably had maybe 3 to 4 days of marriage underneath our belt. And you can almost tell how excited and clueless we were in that picture. And I'll be honest with you, if we all look back to our lives, back right before our weddings, like in the season when you are getting prepared to get married, I think that we will see that we were completely clueless on what we were signing up for. We didn't know, okay? The excitement, but after you get married, you start realizing a couple things. Number one, I'll tell you, Christina signed up for a lot more than she expected. You know, she had no idea what she was getting herself into. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. We looked so happy in this picture. I remember our honeymoon was probably one of our sweetest times in our marriage of just excitement and just so optimistic for the future. And it was phenomenal. And our marriage, by the grace of God, is still very, very strong. But I will tell you, we had no idea how much work this thing called marriage was going to take. And I bet each one of us here, if we start thinking about our own marriages, you'll start thinking about the fact that, you know what, it's been a road since the wedding day to wherever you are right now. And I guarantee you, over the course of that road, your marriage has changed. The first time I gave a talk on this topic, I remember it was in 2012. You know, in 2012, that was 6 years ago, and I was going back through some of my notes from 6 years ago to where I'm at right now, and I realized that even in the last 6 years of my 14-year marriage, things have drastically changed. Because marriages are always evolving. Your marriage, my marriage, people, we're always evolving. And that's going to take a lot of shifts and a lot of adjustments along the way. Because if you don't, you're going to be in a world of hurt. I remember reading an article that said something, and it couldn't be more true. And as time goes on, I kind of laugh at myself sometimes. So I'll find myself in a situation in my marriage, and this thing, it just pops in my mind. Oops. It says change. Women marry men hoping they change. Men marry women hoping they never do. You start thinking about that. And there's going to be times where Christina will look at me and she'd be like, man, if you would just... And I'll be like, yeah, you are really holding your breath for me to change in that category, aren't you? And even if I try really, really hard, I'm probably going to fail. And there's some times where I look at Christina and I would be like, when did you turn into that? Because a mom's role is evolving, right? When you're married, you know, it's you and your spouse, and then all of a sudden you get these little ankle biters that show up and they start taking some of the attention, you know? And a lot of these guys look at their wives and they say, like, why did you change? Well, the reality of it is we all change. We change as people. We change as the marriages change. Women change. Men don't change, unfortunately. But our marriages are always moving. And the thing I want you guys to think about is every single one of our marriages is moving. There's a natural movement, and it is not towards oneness. It's not towards oneness. But the problem is God's plan for marriage is oneness. That's his plan for us. That's why people say good marriages take a lot of work. Because it's not natural. And I think if you'll be honest with yourself in your own marriage, if you look at it and if you're not working hard and if you're not purposeful about it, then the natural direction is for you to go in a direction and your spouse to go in a direction. And they might not be in completely different directions, but it is towards isolation. In Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and they shall be. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. What is oneness? See, oneness in a marriage involves complete unity with one another. It's more than just a mingling of two humans. It's a merger of body, soul, and spirit. All three. And I know that a lot of people, when we were growing up, we would see that verse, and what did we think? We would think that this was referring to the consummation of the marriage. We would think of that this was talking about the wedding night, when the husband and the wife come together. And we merely thought of it as this is just, it talked about sex or maybe even just a physical act. And that's a part of it, because the husband and the wife do become one physically. But let's just be honest, if that's all it was, if it was nothing other than that, then oneness would be happening everywhere around us right now, wouldn't it? We would have dating people have oneness. We would have people who aren't even dating in our hookup society be having oneness too. Well, you be honest, you would have oneness between a bunch of different people. Because now, this physical act, it's not even just for your spouse. That's the way that people are treating it. But that's not what God's meant. And the two become one is so much more than that. And I'll be honest, and I want to challenge you guys, I think that two becomes one is more than we ever even understand. See, because Christine and I, we really struggle with this idea. We were living life in the chaos, of life, right? You think about all of the stuff that and this is even before kids, right? I had my career, she had her career. We had a house that we had to manage. At the same time, we had, our in-laws pulling at us in different directions because they wanted their time and they wanted their time. And I just remember that life was too chaotic for just the two of us. I remember Christina was pregnant with Nathaniel. I remember at this time she was about 6 or 7 months old. And I basically looked at her. I said, dude, we've got to get this under control a little bit. So I signed us up for a marriage enrichment retreat. And so we ended up thinking that this was a great idea. We didn't have a bad marriage. As a matter of fact, I would say that we were even happy. But I figured that this is something that we just need to invest in. We need to be purposeful in. And it was the first time that we showed up to this biblically inspired marital enrichment retreat. And it was the first time that anyone ever spoke to us about this concept of oneness. And not only just about oneness, but they were able to break it down biblically on why this was so important. And the fact that this was God's plan for marriage. It floored us. It floored us. I was literally sitting there and I was totally taken back by everything that they were telling us. We were not experiencing the closeness that God had planned for our marriage. And me and Christine would be able to look at each other and we'd be able to acknowledge it openly. That I don't think this is what God meant for marriage. But we had no idea why. And you think about it. Think about all of the preparation for things that we do in our life, right? For so many things, we're really all about prepping ourselves for it. Think about how much you had to do just to get the job that you have right now. Okay? For some of us, that it might have required a lot of schooling. And I'm talking a lot of schooling. And after you finished your schooling, you signed up for 4 more years of schooling. And then even after those 4 years of schooling, you signed up for an additional 3 or 4 more. Well, maybe it wasn't the schooling, but maybe you had to work your way up to the position that you're in right now. All the preparation, the studying, the experiences that you needed to obtain. But when it comes to marriage, we don't have that, do we? We don't. And I'll be honest, the more experienced you are when it comes to the dating aspect before marriage, chances are the more baggage you're bringing in with you. So what did we do to prepare? I feel a lot of us walk into marriage and we just think, I got this, right? But we really are shooting from the hip. We have no idea what we are doing. We base 90% of what we are doing based off of feelings, right? I'll tell you, when I talk to somebody who's getting engaged and I say, hey, what is it about this person? I say, well, I just love the way that they make me feel. I think it's hilarious. You know what? Because I've been there and I've done that, and I realize that feelings evolve, feelings change, right? Because marriage is not based off of feelings. It's based off of truth and responsibility. Like, that's what it comes down to. And if you're basing it off of feelings, then you will be disappointed. And I remember attending this conference, and I remember the first night, me and Christina looked at each other. We just say that, dude, what they're talking about here is different. This is game changer right here. Like, this is different. And we became sponges, just so thirsty to absorb everything that they were talking about. And what they did is they clearly laid out a biblical blueprint for marriage. And the light went on for Tina and I. Because if you guys grew up in my era, I don't know if you guys did or not, but you guys remember G.I. Joe, right? What was half the battle? Knowing is half the battle, right? And then you got 25% of red lasers and 25% of blue lasers. But 50% is knowing, right? Because I'll tell you, the worst situation you can find yourself in, especially in your marriage, is that knowing that something's not right. Knowing that you're not experiencing what you should be experiencing and having no idea why it's bad or how to fix it. Because then you get frustrated. Then you start guessing what could be wrong. You find yourself in that situation, who do you usually blame? Are we usually looking inside of ourselves in that situation? No. Because you could know that I'm trying hard. I'm doing what I can do. I'm trying to do everything that the Bible's teaching me to do, but all I know it's not working. So if it's not me, it's them. Right? They need to change. They are the problem. And once that starts creeping into your marriage, I'm going to tell you it's a cancer. And it starts small. And it starts undetected. And you start looking at that other person and you start shifting your eyes off of what you could be doing. You can start thinking about what they could be doing. Right? And then it's really small things that start to annoy you. But it continues to grow. And then it develops into bitterness. And you know what happens if bitterness goes long enough unaddressed? The bitterness can turn into hatred. And if it gets there, then we require surgery. Something has to happen to change things. So today, I want to address just 5 threats to oneness in marriage. Because we have to acknowledge that oneness in marriage is God's plan for you. It's God's plan for you, God's plan for your spouse, it's God's plans for your kids to see the oneness in your marriage. So the first one, difficult adjustments. There's not a lot in our culture today or in our society that encourages 2 people to make hard adjustments. In reality, I would really think, we usually are thinking, how can I receive from my spouse? So on the front burner, all of my needs, all of my issues, all of the things that I want, right? And you think about, how cute it is when we date, right? You think about all the things that we watch in movies. One of the things that still just kind of cracks me up every single time you hear it, and it's one of those taglines, is Jerry Maguire, right? Like the Warm and Fuzzies, right? Where he looks at you and says, you complete me. But what you don't see is the fact that that's not real life. Everyone wants that moment because guess what? That's a 2-hour movie, right? And it's easy. You don't have to see how it plays out. You don't see the day-to-day life, right? But they're selling you on this idea that this is what love should look like. This is what your marriage should look like. You're going to find this person who all of your, you guys complete each other and it's going to be awesome. But what they don't talk to you about, so they don't talk about all of the cute little differences that will cause you to isolate. I'm just going to run through a few of these, and you tell me whether or not this has ever affected your marriage. How about values, right? Values is a game changer when your kids are born. Because usually before kids, you can say, hey, you do you and I do me, and we're going to be fine. But then kids come into play, and all of a sudden, now you guys are going to have to adjust a little bit when it comes to values. How about spiritual beliefs? What if you think your kid should be raised, or even if something that you want your spouse to do spiritually, and the spouse is like, no, I'm not on board with that, and you have to adjust to that. How about finances? Because everyone brings in a spending pattern, don't they? And I'm going to tell you, you want to talk about like opposites attracting? This is one of the ones that's most humorous. Because you talk to every single couple, who's the spender and who's the saver? And there's one in every single couple. And I know that causes friction. How about family history, past relationship, painful experiences? These are all difficult adjustments that your marriages are going to require you to step into. Sometimes we get married for the wrong reasons. And man, when reality hits, then you need a shocking adjustment, right? Because you signed up for something, And it's blatantly different than what you thought. Wrong reasons you can get married? How about feelings? We talked about that. Did you guys know that feelings is the number one reason people get married? Do you also know that feelings are the number one reason people get divorced? You know, how about sexual attraction? Right? People were like, well, we just have such a chemistry. Right? Such a chemistry. Well, here's the funny thing, right? After marriage, if you are married, is that chemistry like everlasting? I hope you have more than that. I really do. Right? I heard this quote and it was great. And it said, Satan will try to get you, will do anything to try to get you to have sex before marriage. And he will do anything to prevent you from having it after. And it's so true. Culture or family pressures. A lot of people getting married just to get married because they're getting a lot of pressure on their back. And then they end up finding themselves in a situation that was even miserable than before. How about, this is one, escape. A lot of people are doing it just to get out. Like anywhere is better than here. And guess what? Then they quickly realize, no, it's not. No, it's not. How about different expectations about marriage that's going to require adjustments as well? I'll tell you one that hit home in my marriage really quick. We all bring in defined roles, right? Like everyone thinks that the husband should do this and the wife should do this. And I'll tell you, if you know me, if you know my father-in-law is a general contractor. Okay, so he is clearly very handy. The man can literally build a house with his hands, right? So you can imagine how Christina felt when we got married and she said, hey, can you hang up these pictures? And I was just like, no. She's like, well, what do you mean no? I don't do that. She's like, well, what do you mean you don't do that? And I said, I literally, if I even attempted to hang up pictures, they will not be the way that you want them. They will not be straight. They will not be evenly spaced. You will be frustrated. I will be frustrated. Therefore, let me alleviate the problem. And why don't you just hire somebody to come and hang up your pictures? Because that's how I will meet that role. But there's a disconnect there. And 14 years later, Christina still looks at me, and I know that a part of her dies every single time that something needs to be done around the house. Because I'm just not that guy. How about the way that we receive or express love? See, because this is probably one of the biggest issues that we see in marriages. Gary Chapman is a multimillionaire now because he wrote the book called The 5 Love Languages. That's one of the biggest sellers out there. And it talks about something it's very, very simple, right? Is the fact that we all give love typically the same way that we like to receive it. Now, if my love language is words of affirmation, and I like it when Christina affirms me, and I want to show Christina love, and I affirm Christina verbally, and I'm thinking, man, I am just the most loving husband that there is out there. But Christina's love language could be something completely different, like something like quality time or gifts or something like that. I'm pouring out all of this love, and it's totally wasted on her. And I have a wife who's feeling unloved, unappreciated, and everything else, right? So it takes adjustment. Plans for the future. What if I had a very different outlook for my future than my wife? Well, the reality of it is I'm going to start walking towards the future that I want, and she's going to start walking towards the future that she wants. Well, what happens if they're in different directions? Isolation. See, because the first thing is when couples fail to make necessary adjustments to move forward towards oneness, the result, 10 out of 10 times, isolation. The second threat, our culture's pattern. Our culture's pattern is 50-50 performance-based relationship, right? Like, acceptance is based off of your performance. Like, if you do your part, therefore I will do my part. Like, when I get home from work, I want there to be a clean house, I want there to be food on the table, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And if I get everything that I want, therefore I will reciprocate with whatever you want, right? Everything's based off of merit. Affection is given when someone feels that it's deserved. Motivation for action is based how you feel. We already covered this. Feelings, you can't base anything off of feelings. Because our culture's pattern of 50-50, it will always self-destruct. It will never, ever work. First reason, you're biased. I chose the guy one. Okay, I don't want to put the girl one up there. But you're biased. The reality of it is what we see in ourselves is very, very different than what's actually out there. So it is impossible for us to accurately measure our 50%, right? Also, on top of that, 50-50 based off of what? If you have unrealistic expectations, then no one will ever be able to meet your 50-50, right? How about the fact that one of the things that I always think about is we require justice for the faults of others, but we demand mercy for our own. What does that look like in marriage, right? Like, we all know that we're not perfect. We all know that we have hindrances. We all have stuff that we drop the ball on. But we expect our wife to put up with that and say, hey, I just need a little bit of grace here, right? But I did realize that you forgot to do this and this and this and this and this. So when you're working 50-50, it'll never work because you're always willing to cut yourself slack, but usually not for the spouse, right? And my disappointment will paralyze my performance towards my spouse. So we will never be able to know whether or not our spouse meets us 50% of the way. So if you are waiting for your spouse to show up to put up their 50% before you put up yours, you know what the result is every single time? Isolation. Threat number 3, inevitable difficulties. There are 2 types of traps that we can fall when it starts coming to difficulties. Because some people think that their marriage will be exempt from this. They think that they're not going to have difficulties. They think that it's 100%, and I'm telling you that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, I don't care if you are perfect. I don't care if your spouse is perfect. Marriages hit hard times 100% of the time. Even if you don't see it coming, I guarantee you it will come. And a lot of people who don't see it coming, who think that their marriage will be exempt from it, then they start thinking that their marriage was a mistake. Marriage isn't supposed to be this hard. I try to do everything right. I'm focused on my marriage. And if my marriage is hard, then it's either A, I married the wrong person, or actually, no, that's usually where it just goes. That I just married the wrong person. I made a mistake. And we think that marriage was not supposed to be this hard. And my question for you is, who told you that? Who told you marriage wasn't going to be this hard? One of my favorite stories, I talk about it all the time, is Matthew 7, right? So Christ likens, he has this example where he's got 2 people, and it says one built his house on the rock, and the other one built his house on the sand. And which house did the storm hit? Well, we often forget that the rain descended, the flood came, and the winds blew and beat on both houses. 100% of the houses. And many times we think, being Christians, that we're going to be exempt or spared from the storms. But we will never be exempt or spared. The storm always hits both houses. The only difference between the 2 houses was the outcome. So I guarantee you that your house will be shook by a storm. But it's going to be your decision on whether or not the house falls or the house stands. Because the followers of Christ, when we apply what this book tells us to do, when we live in accordance to these principles, it tells us how to navigate when we're in a storm. How to deal with the fact that you have a house that is getting bombarded with storms. Now, when these storms hit, usually there's 2 different things. There's 2 different effects it can have on a house, right? The first one and this is actually, I read this very sad statistic. And it says divorce rates of a couple losing a child. Can anyone guess how high that was? 90%. As high as 90%. Because when hard times do hit, and we've already guaranteed that hard times will hit, people turn to isolate. Not only do they isolate, but they look at their spouse and they blame. Because we all know, and I'm sure we've seen it in our marriages, anger needs an outlet. So when hard time comes and there's anger, who are you going to point it at? What are you going to do with it? Because I fear that a lot of these times when these storms hit, and a lot of times it could be the husband's fault, and a lot of times it could be the wife's fault. But if you want your house to stand, the one thing that you should not do is turn it around and blame it at your spouse. That's a recipe for disaster. Because God will use these times, where times are hard. There's a reason the 2 of you are together. It's to support each other. It's to love each other through these difficult times. To offer your shoulder, to offer comfort, to offer all of these things. Not to turn against one another. It's funny, as a lot of you guys might know that I'm a banker. I've shared that before. And it was crazy because I remember after the downturn of the economy, we started seeing in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, we'd have customer after customer coming in because they were going through divorces. They're getting bank statements. They're taking spouses' names off of properties and things like that. And I just wonder, I'm like, dude, what happened here? Why are all of these business owners going through divorce? And I remember I was talking to one of my clients, and he basically said, he says, you know what? Because when the money dries up, times get hard, right? It puts undue stress on the relationship, But one thing it was a God-fearing business owner who also had hardship in his business, but he said that one of the things that me and my spouse decided to do very early on when the economy was turning and the money was drying up, and we knew that it was going to be tough times ahead, that we vowed to each other that we would not turn on each other. He says we were united, and we decided that we will weather the storm together, and we were not each other's enemy, but we would make the difficult adjustments necessary to see through it together. Because difficulties do not mean that something's wrong with your marriage. Now, at times, you could have problems in your marriage that can bring difficulties. But do not think that just because there's difficulties that there's a problem in your marriage. Your response to difficulties will either drive you together, it'll drive you apart, or bind you together. Now, when these times hit, we have to move through these times without rejecting or withdrawing from our spouses. And God uses these times to forge together. And that's when you start thinking about people. Have you ever talked to somebody who's gone through war with somebody else? These guys are like brothers at this point. Anyone who's gone through hard circumstances together, it molds them together. And I'm going to ask you to use that same principle in your marriages. That when these hard times hit, that you use this opportunity to forge yourself to your spouse, not to isolate. Because when couples fail to grasp God's perspective on difficulties and problems, if you don't do it correctly, the result will be isolation. So there's threat number 4. Extramarital affairs. Now, I want to define that real quick because I know that everyone's mind goes to something when you say that. But an extramarital affair is an escape from reality or a search for fulfillment outside the marriage. Now, when you say that, everyone thinks that this is a physical affair with another person. Okay, and that could be. That is an extramarital affair. But I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to think of, a couple more things it could be. Because it's an escape from reality or a search for fulfillment outside the marriage. How about an activities affair? Overcommitment. So things aren't great at home. So what do? You basically overcommit doing a bunch of other stuff because that's where you're going to get your satisfaction. That's where you're going to start feeling good about yourself. You know what? If this sucks here, I'm going to do this over there. Right? We see this all the time with people at work. I've got people who are working tough hours, putting in a lot of hours. I say, dude, go home. He's just like, home's not great for me. I'd rather be here, right? That's a threat to the guy's marriage. Materialism affair. There's a lot of people, shopping is their coping mechanism. So when stuff's going on at home and they don't want to worry about that, they'll go out and they'll start spending. I know a girl who basically, she was going through some stuff with her husband, and actually, it's funny how I heard this, because the husband was complaining about the wife's spending habits, right? So then the wife was basically saying, well, this guy did this, so I went out and I charged up $5,000 to $7,000. And it was just like, you see it all kind of come to the surface here, that it was an extramarital affair at that point, right? You have the family affair, where you put your family above your spouse, and that's where you're getting your fulfillment from, and you're robbing the time and the attention from your spouse to give it somewhere else, and it could be another person, which is obviously a tough one to overcome. But God offers reconciliation there too. I'm not going to downplay it. It's devastating. But there could be healing there too, if it's done appropriately. We are seduced by our culture into believing that we deserve complete fulfillment and perfect happiness. But you don't see that anywhere in the pages of Scripture. You don't see that God's promising that your spouse is going to meet all of your needs all of the time, every day. Society programs us to think that that's how it goes. When we watch these little, comedy romances where everything is great and these guys are perfect and these girls are perfect, But the problem is that starts becoming our expectation. We start thinking that that's our expectation, but that's fantasies. That's not real life. And people, when you start thinking about it, when we start buying into the lies that Hollywood is telling us, we start to question reality, not the fantasy. We should be questioning the fantasy. Because when you start getting all of that satisfaction outside of your marriage, the result is always going to be isolation. And number 5, which I believe is probably one of the biggest threats to your marriage, selfishness. Every single one of us here, every single one of us has a natural tendency to be self-centered and destructive in relationships. And I'm going to tell you, even if you have the most successful, what you feel is a 50-50 relationship, I'm going to tell you, your best case scenario, and I still think you're delusional, is 51-49. Because we are all selfish. And today our culture promotes and encourages selfishness. You know, because many of us, we get married with stars in our eyes, and this is what we think marriage is, right? We think it's no problem, right? I'm going to start pursuing, and even if we take a little detour from one another, we're going to end up right there together. Right? And in dating, when you start thinking about what it was that was important to you while you were dating, it takes very, very little daily responsibility. Right? We would date a couple times a week, put our best foot forward, and then we would retreat back, and we'd go right back to our selfish selves. Right? Early in the relationship, appreciation and approval are very, very easily given. Right? Selfishness robs a relationship of its romance. And our selfishness focuses on our spouse's weakness. It focuses on their mistakes, their failures to meet our expectations. Because when we're selfish, who's it about? It's about me. And if I don't have what I want, it's your fault. It's your fault. And our disappointments and our approval, and I love it. This is like the perfect, you guys have probably seen this before, but it's the crazy cycle, right? And they say that this is what happens with a man and a woman. So the man, so let's say the man is not loving his wife correctly, right? She reacts, and when she reacts, she withdraws, and he feels disrespected, right? And then when he's disrespected, he withholds love, and when he withholds more love, she goes and she reacts. And you find yourself in this nasty cycle that you're never, ever going to get free from. See, because our selfish nature even seeks to justify our rejection of our spouse. Because we think it's okay. Why would I give her what she wants if she's not giving me what I want? And the result is isolation. Now, this is such a big topic when it comes to marriage. We can do a year-long series on this, and we would not even crack the topic. And I'll be honest with you, I think there would probably still be a lot of work to be done. But one of the things that I want you guys to realize is in your marriage right now, if you feel there's isolation, then you need to have a talk with your spouse. And you need to start talking about how you might be able to bridge it. Don't avoid it. Because avoiding the topic will only make you isolate more. It'll only make the problems worse. And it's not going to get any better. But I'm going to challenge you to be purposeful, to be intentional. Even if you don't know exactly how at this point, it's to start trying to work through it. Now, and I know that this church here, we're all about family. From the formation of this church, we're all about family. You know, and I'll be honest, even more specifically, we're probably all about our kids. Because we came to this church because we wanted to cast this different vision for our kids. Our kids is probably one of the main reasons that this church was even formed. It's one of the main reasons we spend so much time focusing on putting together a phenomenal Sunday school program. It's one of the reasons why we have so many committed Sunday school servants, you know, who are stewarding our kids, and they've accepted the responsibility and they do it wholeheartedly. But let's make no mistake about it. If we want healthy kids, if we want fruitful kids, if we want kids who are developing correctly, spiritually, if you want the highest probability for your kid to have a strong marriage, it starts at home. It starts at home. It doesn't start down the hallway. It doesn't come when we drop them off here in Sunday school. It doesn't come when we send them on a youth retreat. That's not where it starts. I don't care what we do with them for the couple hours a week we have them. It will never be enough to overcome what you do in your own house. So invest there. Invest there. If not even for your own sake, for the sake of your kids. Do what you can. Because it's on us to model for them the type of marriages we want them to have. And the scary thought is what if they settled for the type of marriages that we have currently? I know there's a lot of people that they would not want their kids to have their marriage. But we're not modeling anything different. So I challenge you guys, have the marriage that you hope your kids have. And start a strong legacy. And it all starts with your marriage. And glory be to God forever. Pray everyone. It's nice that you're with us. No, it's nice that you're with us.
Stand up to pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Our living Lord and Savior, we thank you for everything concerning everything and everything. We thank you for the message that you have sent to us today. We ask and entreat you to help us to overcome all the obstacles that separate us from one another. Help us to strive to be more like you, to be less selfish, to be less focused on the things of the world, to be less focused on our own needs and put the needs of our spouse and of our family before. Help us to seek the heavenly instead of the earthly. Help us to desire to have our family be modeled after that of the kingdom of heaven. Bless us with every spiritual blessing. Bless each one of us of our families and our marriages and our relationships so that it may be rooted and grounded in love and in faith and in the power of the Holy Trinity manifest in our lives. Bless us with every spiritual blessing and direct us always to the kingdom of heaven. Through the intercession and supplication of the Holy Mother of God, Saint Mary, the blessing of the holy apostles and the holy transfiguration, make us worthy to pray thankfully. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Go in peace, and the peace of the Lord be with you. Thank you, Peter.